What would you do if you saw a disabled man, clearly a veteran, being mocked, shoved, and humiliated by a group of bikers? Would you walk away, pretend not to see it, afraid to interfere? Or would you step in, knowing full well the cost of standing up against the wrong crowd? I didn't think I'd ever have to answer that question, but that day I did. And the answer changed everything. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon in the small town of Red Pines, a place where not much happened. The kind of town where everybody knew each other, and strangers stood out like sore thumbs. I was at Rosie's diner, nursing a cup of black coffee and trying to ignore the ache in my knees from years of construction work. Outside, the sun stretched, long shadows across Main Street. And that's when I saw him. The man wheeling himself across the parking lot wasn't just any man. He wore a faded navy jacket, the kind only given to those who earned it. His hands were scarred, his posture disciplined, and his eyes, even from a distance, looked like they'd seen things most of us couldn't imagine. But his dignity stood taller than any of us walking on 2 feet. Then came the rumble. 3 bikers pulled into the lot, leather jackets creaking, engines growling. The kind of men who think the world owes them something. They laughed too loudly, moved too aggressively. And the moment they spotted the veteran, I knew something was about to go wrong. I pressed my hand against the diner window, frozen as I watched one of the bikers throw a beer can at the man's wheelchair. It clattered against the metal frame. The man didn't flinch. He simply turned his head slowly, eyes locked on the biker. Calm, controlled, like he'd faced worse, but they wanted a reaction. One of them walked up behind him and shoved his chair. The veteran's hands braced the wheels. He didn't fall, but the shove sent him forward a few feet. That's when I stood up. So did Rosie, the owner of the diner. "Someone's got to do something," she said, reaching for her phone. I was already out the door. "Hey!" I shouted, crossing the parking lot. "Back off!" The biggest of the bikers turned and smiled, like he'd been waiting for someone to step in. "Look who's playing hero." The veteran turned his head slightly, gave me a look, not of gratitude, not of fear, just a measured warning. "Don't make this worse." "Leave him alone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was no fighter, just a tired man in a plaid shirt with more spine than sense. "You know him?" the biker asked, stepping toward me. "No," I said, "but I know he deserves respect. You mess with him, you mess with all of us." The biker took another step. "All of us? Looks like it's just you." And then came the voice, low, commanding, with a chill that cut through the summer heat. "He's not alone." It came from behind the diner. Boots hit the pavement. 1, then 2, then 5 men rounded the corner in perfect sync. Not just any men. Marines. You could tell from the way they carried themselves. Each of them had that same look in their eyes, like they'd been shaped by fire, bonded by something deeper than blood. The lead Marine walked past me without a glance, stood beside the veteran. He rested a hand on the old man's shoulder and looked at the bikers. "This man's name is Sergeant William Tate," he said. "He served in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. 3 wars. Purple Heart, Silver Star, Bronze Star. He trained half of us. He bled for this country. You don't get to touch him." The bikers took a step back. For the first time, they looked unsure. The veteran, Sergeant Tate, finally spoke. His voice was rough, quiet, but strong. "Boys, this isn't about me. It's about who you are when nobody's watching." And then he turned his chair around and started wheeling back toward the sidewalk. The Marines formed a silent wall behind him. The bikers? They backed off, muttered something, and left. The whole diner had emptied onto the sidewalk. People clapped, not because there was a fight, but because someone reminded them what dignity looked like. I walked over to Sergeant Tate. "You okay, sir?" I asked. He nodded. "Been through worse." He paused. "But thank you." One of the Marines looked at me. "He's got more honor in that wheelchair than most have standing tall." That night I couldn't sleep, not because of what I'd seen, but because of what I almost didn't do. I almost stayed in that diner. I almost let silence win. What would you do? That's what this story's about. Because sometimes a small act of courage echoes louder than the loudest engine, and Sometimes the man you try to tear down is the very one who built the ground you stand on. And trust me, that was just the beginning. Red Pines had seen better days. It had once been a logging town, busy, proud, noisy with the sound of work. But over the years, the industry died down. Now, most of the people stayed because they had nowhere else to go, or because the quiet felt like something they'd earned, like Sergeant William Tate. After the incident at Rosie's Diner, word traveled faster than a summer storm. By evening, everyone in town knew what had happened. Some were ashamed they hadn't been there. Some proud someone stood up. But most just couldn't stop talking about the way those Marines arrived, like a shadow being lifted. I couldn't get it out of my head. So the next morning I showed up outside Sergeant Tate's little home near the edge of town. It was an old place. Wooden porch, chipped paint, wind chimes made from bullet casings. He was on the porch, working on a fishing reel. "Mine company?" I asked. He looked up, that same calm in his eyes. "Long as you don't need to borrow sugar." I laughed nervously and stepped closer. "I wanted to check on you," I said. "After yesterday." He nodded. "You saw it. That enough for me?" Hesitated. "Those men, the ones who showed up, they called you Sarge. You trained them?" He stopped winding the reel and looked into the distance. "Some of them, yeah. Others I carried when their legs wouldn't work anymore. Some carried me back. It's what we do." There was a pause. Just the wind and the clink of the chimes. "You still keep in touch?" I asked. "When it matters." He squinted toward the trees. "They're always close, not just in miles. In memory. In duty." I sat on the porch steps, quiet. I didn't know what to say. I just knew I didn't want to leave. After a while, he spoke again. "You know what hurts more than the chair?" he asked. "It's not the shrapnel, not the surgeries. It's coming home and being forgotten. Not by everyone. Just by the ones who've never had to carry anything heavier than their own pride." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm sorry, sir." "Don't be," he said. "You stepped up. That's more than most." We sat in silence a while longer. Before I left, he said something that stuck with me. "They didn't push me out of that chair yesterday, but I've been pushed out of rooms, out of jobs, out of people's minds. I'm used to it. Doesn't mean it's right." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him, and I wasn't the only one. At the town meeting, a few days later, people showed up in record numbers, not for politics, but to talk about him. About Sergeant Tate, about the veterans who lived in town, and how invisible they'd become. One of the teenagers who worked at the grocery store stood up and said, "I didn't even know he lived here, but I want to help. We should do something." And that's how it started. A ripple, a soft one, but it was about to grow into a wave. Because when you see a man like Tate, broken but unbent, you don't just thank him. You follow his lead. And Red Pines was about to change. For good. The following Saturday, Red Pines woke up to the sound of hammers and saws. Not because someone was building a new home, but because people were building something they'd forgotten how to: community. Right outside Rosie's Diner, a group of townsfolk, teenagers and retirees alike, gathered to put up a platform. Not for politics, not for sales, for stories, for honor. And it started with Sergeant William Tate. "Morning, sir," I said as I approached him at the edge of the diner parking lot. He was there in his wheelchair as usual, arms folded, a thermal mug in one hand. He gave a small nod. "You brought the coffee?" I held it up with a grin. "Black, no sugar. Just how—" "You like it," he chuckled. "You learn fast." We sat in silence, watching people work. Kids painted wooden signs. A retired contractor named Milton measured the platform. Rosie came out with breakfast sandwiches. "You sure about this?" I asked Tate. "A public event?" Tate sipped. "It ain't about me. It's about reminding folks why freedom matters, and what it costs." That's when I knew. This wasn't about one man in a wheelchair. This was about all the invisible warriors hiding in plain sight. And Tate was finally ready to speak. By noon, the platform was up. People brought folding chairs. A microphone was set. The sun hung high as if pausing for what was about to happen. Tate wheeled onto the stage. No fanfare, no dramatic intro, just quiet attention. He looked out at the crowd, maybe 50 people, small for the world, huge for Red Pines. "I ain't much for speeches," he said, "but I reckon y'all deserve the truth." He took a breath. "I was 17 when I signed up, lied about my age. Didn't want to stay in a house where silence meant fear and the radio was the only voice of hope. I wanted out, so I chose war." You could hear a pin drop. First deployment. Vietnam, jungle heat, mosquitoes big as birds. Friends didn't make it. I did. Then Iraq, then Afghanistan. Different sands, same ghosts. He paused. People think war is loud, but you know what sticks? The silence after, when the shooting stops, but your heart keeps racing. When you come home, but your mind stays behind. I glanced around. Grown men were crying. Rosie was clutching a tissue. Even the bikers from last week, they were in the back, quiet, listening. Tate continued. "Every time I came home, I told myself, this is it. I'll be seen. I'll be heard. But the hardest part of war is the peace that never comes. Not because we can't find it, but because most people stop looking." He leaned forward in his chair. "I'm not bitter. I'm blessed. Blessed to still be here. But not all of us made it. Some are buried, some are breathing but not living, and some are right here, next to you, praying someone finally asks them, 'How are you really doing?'" He nodded toward a man near the back. Corporal Jim Mason. "Lost both legs in Fallujah, lives 2 blocks from here. Nobody's visited him in a year." Mason looked up, stunned. The crowd turned. People whispered. One lady stood. "I'll visit," she said. Tate smiled. "That's all it takes. One step, even if it's toward a man who can't take any." Applause, not loud, but powerful. The event ended quietly. No music, no banners, just people shaking hands, offering rides, making plans. But what came next, nobody expected. 3 days later, a black SUV pulled into town. Out stepped a woman in uniform, Colonel Dana Reyes. She was from the VA regional office. "We heard about what happened," she said. "About Sergeant Tate, about the community. I met her at the diner. We're establishing a new rural outreach program," she said, "and we want Red Pines to be our pilot town." By the end of the week, the town library had a new section, Veterans Corner. Every Thursday, vets gathered, told stories, shared meals, connected Tate. He didn't change. He still wheeled down Main Street every morning, still nodded to strangers, still spoke little. But one afternoon, as we sat on the porch again, he said something that stuck. "I didn't need a stage. I needed a porch, a place where someone listens." I nodded. "You got it now." He looked at the horizon. "Let's hope others do too." And we sat there, 2 men, one with scars outside, one with scars in, knowing the war might never end, but neither would the will to be seen. And Red Pines, it was never the same. It was better. The week after Sergeant Tate's speech, things didn't just change, they shifted. There was something different in the way people walked, a little slower, a little more aware. Shopkeepers opened early, not to sell, but to talk. Kids waved more. Eye contact was longer, not uncomfortable, meaningful. On Monday morning, Sheriff Lucas showed up at the diner. "Morning, Tate," he said, removing his hat. Tate glanced up. "Sheriff?" Lucas looked awkward, like a man not used to saying certain things. "I watched the whole thing Saturday. I owe you an apology. For that day in the shop, I should have handled it differently." Tate nodded. "Apology accepted. Thing is," Lucas continued, clearing his throat, "I think we could use your help. I'm starting a new community initiative. Veteran mentorship for at-risk youth. Kids who've lost their way, need guidance. We could use someone like you. Someone real." For a second, Tate didn't speak. Then, quietly, "Only if you're not asking for stories. Only if you're asking for time." Lucas grinned. "That's exactly what I'm asking." By the following week, Red Pines High School started a program called 2 Hours with a Hero. Every Thursday, veterans visited classrooms. They didn't lecture. They just talked. Some cried, some made jokes, but all of them made an impact. One kid, Trey, had a father overseas. He never talked in class, always had his hoodie up, eyes down. But when Corporal Jim Mason, the double amputee Tate mentioned, shared how he writes poetry to calm the war inside, Trey raised his hand for the first time all semester. "Could you read one?" he asked. Jim did. And when he was done, the whole room clapped, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Tate, meanwhile, became a local legend. But not in the way you'd expect. He refused interviews, declined news stories. He just kept showing up. At the diner, the library, the school, listening, nodding, quietly guiding. One day, I found him outside the old train station with a group of teenage boys. He had an old photo in his hand, him and his squad from Iraq. None of the boys said a word, they just looked. "This guy," Tate said, pointing. "Saved my life twice. Got a letter last week. He's working in a soup kitchen now. Said he still can't sleep through the night." The boys didn't know what to say. "Point is," Tate added, "every one of us carries something. If you see someone struggling, don't ask what's wrong with them. Ask what happened to them. That hit them. You could tell." Later that day, Rosie pinned a new note above the diner's chalkboard menu. "Be gentle. You don't know the battles people carry." Weeks passed. Then months, spring came, and with it, a change that nobody saw coming. It started with a letter. The governor of the state had heard about Red Pines, about the vet in the wheelchair, the program, the change. He sent a request. Would Sergeant Tate accept the state service? Medal for community impact? Tate declined, but he wrote a letter back. "I don't need a medal. I need people to keep showing up for each other. That's the real reward." They framed that letter and hung it in City Hall. On Memorial Day, Red Pines held a new kind of ceremony. No parades, no speeches. Just a long table set in the town square, an empty chair for every fallen soldier. No music, only the sound of names being read, slowly, carefully. And at the end of that ceremony, Sergeant Tate rolled up to the microphone again. None of us signed up for the recognition. We signed up for each other. Don't clap for us. Walk with us. People stood, quietly, some with tears, some with hands over hearts. That night, I walked Tate back to his porch. He looked tired, but peaceful. "You think it'll last?" I asked. He looked up at the stars. "No change lasts if it's built on moments. It has to be built on people. People willing to do the boring work of kindness." I nodded. "So what now?" He smiled. "Now we live it, day by day." As I left, I saw a teenager picking up trash on the sidewalk, a man helping an old woman with her groceries. The town hadn't become perfect, but it had remembered something vital, that behind every quiet man, every scar, every story untold, there is a world worth knowing, and sometimes all it takes is to ask and to listen. Red Pines was listening now. One summer evening, Tate was wheeling down the main road when he noticed a boy, maybe 14, sitting on the curb. Eyes red, fists clenched. "You okay, son?" The boy didn't answer. Tate waited. "My brother's in Afghanistan. Mom's been drinking. Dad left. I don't know what to do." Tate didn't preach, just wheeled up beside him. "Let's sit here a while," he said. And they did, for an hour, in silence. Later that night, the boy followed Tate to the diner. He came every day after that, and soon he wasn't the only one. The town's kids began gathering around Tate not because he offered solutions, but because he offered presence, a steady, unwavering presence. And when Tate passed 5 years later, the entire town shut down. Not out of obligation, but love. Flags hung half-mast. The diner closed. Red Pines High held a moment of silence that stretched for 10 whole minutes. The Marines came. So did the kids, now grown, who once sat beside him, broken and confused. They stood in a circle, sharing stories. "I was going to drop out," one said. "He told me to learn how to fail before I gave up. He showed me how to write again," another whispered. I hadn't picked up a pen in 2 years. His funeral wasn't broadcast. There were no politicians, just people. Rosie placed his favorite mug, still chipped, on his casket, and in City Hall, beside his old letter, they added a new plaque. He didn't change the world. He changed ours. Years later, children would visit the bench outside the old train station, where a bronze statue of a man in a wheelchair now sat. Not because he was famous, because he was good, because he listened, and because he reminded everyone that sometimes the smallest acts, a hand on a shoulder, a quiet sit beside someone in pain, are the ones that save lives. That was Sergeant Tate's legacy, and in Red Pines it still grows, every Thursday 2 hours at a time.